It's the 8th of May. I know because it's my birthday.
We're going to party like it's your birthday, and indeed we're going to drink Bacardi like it's your birthday. It's episode 153 of the Scottish Liberty Podcast. Happy birthday to Tam. I personally have seen a lot of major developments happening with this coronavirus lockdown, not least being moved on by cops last night when I was 7:15 bathing in the Scottish sunlight. It was the night before last, actually.
You were
Not
naked, though. In fairness.
See, that's how propaganda works. I chose to omit that detail. I was sunbathing at 7:15. There was no one else there in sunbathing. During the day, there were a bunch of people on the lawn. I know because I took an illegal walk. I took more than one walk. And the cop came down on his bike and said, "Can I move you on, sir?" And I was like, "Yeah, all right." I thought he was closing the park down, but no, he was just moving me on. So our guest today is Michael Cheney, he of the Michael Cheney Show, and his coverage of the coronavirus and the lockdown has been nothing short of extraordinary. He's been pumping out material, and just really well researched, hitting so many major points. I'm glad that there's someone who's got time to do all this. So he's kind enough to join us. Thanks for coming on, Michael.
Oh, you're very welcome. I like getting the word out about this stuff. So no, it's good to be here.
Right. So I don't know. I guess we could start with some basics, like just a quick rundown of some of the ways that corona figures have been massaged, because that was one of the things that because this informs everything else that we're going to talk about today. Hopefully we won't get taken down from YouTube for pointing out the fact.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really where this all started for me, was looking at the numbers and trying to, there's lots of people out there that are talking about conspiracies and trying to come up with wild theories. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in the origin of the virus particularly, or who's done it or whatever. I'm more looking at what is actually happening in terms of deaths. What is the government response around the world, and is this justified, or should something different be happening? And like everyone else, I know we kind of read what we find. We do a bit of research, but as you say, I've got time because I'm a full-time podcaster, YouTuber, online. I run an online business, have done for 20 years, so I'm able to devote a lot of time to this. So that's really how it started, really just as a member of the public. I just thought, what's going on? But I started, the deeper I got into this, the more I found out. So in terms of the deaths, there's a lot of things now that have come out that used to be kind of a conspiracy theory, but are now just a fact. For example, the way that they measure deaths, okay? In the US, for example, and I guess also in the UK, the doctors have been put under some pressure to measure people or put people as a COVID death on this death certificate. Yeah. They don't have to test even for COVID-19 in the US in order to put it down as a COVID-19 death on the death certificate. There needs to be a suspicion. But you've also got to remember that they do get paid more money. Hospitals will get $19,000 in the US if they admit a patient who has COVID-19, and $39,000 if that patient is put on a ventilator. So there is a financial motivation for them to do that.
Right.
And that's from Medicare or Medicaid. They're getting paid out these huge sums of money from. So basically, they might put someone on a ventilator that doesn't need one, just to get an extra $20,000. It's shocking.
Yeah, they could be doing that. I mean, there was a piece I found. It was from Dr. John Lee. This was in The Spectator, and he was talking about Professor Neil Ferguson, who, as we all know, is the
doctor of love,
Professor Lockdown, who is now Professor Lovedown. Obviously, we should all be locked down, but he's not. Yeah. But anyway, when he came out with the report that was really the basis for all of this with Imperial College London, it wasn't a peer-reviewed report, which, as we all know, any kind of kindergarten kid knows that if you haven't got a peer-reviewed scientific paper, it's not worth jack.
Yeah.
But it wasn't peer reviewed. It came out. He initially said 500,000 people will die in the UK. One day after social distancing, he changed that to 20,000. There's no way that one day's worth of social distancing had that impact on the model. So I don't know what was going on there. But even when he was pulled in front of Parliament, he said, this was Neil Ferguson himself, said that 2/3 of the number of COVID-19 deaths in the UK would have actually died anyway. So that's by his admission. This is not, some tinfoil hat guy. This is the main guy that created the model, is saying that, 2/3 of the figures that we're seeing are people that would have died anyway. The other thing is they're never telling us people that have died from COVID-19. It's always with COVID-19. It's like, this person died with skin. Well, yeah, everybody dies with skin unless they're in a really bad accident. But, do they die because of that,
Yeah.
And in Italy, I saw this video just yesterday from a politician standing up in Italy. And he was basically getting sick of this and calling it out as well. I'm just trying to find this guy's name rather than just rattling off. This was, what the guy's name? Oh, Vittorio Scarpi. And he stood up in Parliament in Italy and basically said, no, this is all lies. It's not 25,000 people that have died. He said 96.3% did not die of coronavirus. They had other pathologies.
Wow.
Yes.
So he's saying only 925 in Italy died from the virus. Almost all of them had underlying causes.
Yeah.
So that was really the linchpin to all of this is, because the measures that have been put in place are totally, as they keep telling us, unprecedented, never before seen, obviously massive infringement on all of our liberties for practically everybody around the world. And it's based on science that is inaccurate and incomplete and sometimes just not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
And meanwhile, what baffles me about the whole thing is, if somebody had have said 2 months ago at the start of this thing, we are going to subject every immigrant and every person who comes into the country on a flight or a boat, we're going to subject them to these lockdown measures, people would have went nuts and went, that's an absolute infringement of these people's human liberties. You've got no you've got no evidence that this is going to help, blah, blah, blah. But because it just affected us all, apart from the people who were coming in airplanes, apparently there's flights coming into Heathrow every day with people on it, and nobody was testing them. They were just getting onto public transport and, advised to go into their own personal lockdown. And you think, this is all very, very weird. What's the truth of this whole thing? And like you say, the figures, I don't think anybody trusts the stats. Stats are open to manipulation anyway, but in this particular case, even in my own circles and experience, extended family, very few people have had it or knows somebody that's had it. Or maybe they have, because everybody's had a weird headache or something at any given time. You've had maybe one of the many symptoms, and you could have had it in a mild form and nobody knows. But my entire family's not keeling over one after another, thank God. And that kind of tells me itself, this is not as severe as the stats they're manipulating, make out. And they never ever say, they never ever put it in perspective. They go, okay, the deaths are such and such. That's 1 per every 100,000, or that's 6 per every, they never ever put it in perspective.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, you got to realize, I think it's around 800 people die on average every day in the UK anyway. Yeah. So when they're hitting us with these figures, we've got to take that with a pinch of salt and realize that most of these have underlying conditions. Most of these people have some kind of, they're old age or they've got some kind of serious condition going on anyway. So they would have died anyway. They would have been part of that 800.
Yeah.
And what, a lot of doctors are saying, there's a doctor, again, I saw a video just yesterday from a doctor in, I think it was Riverside County in California in the US, standing outside his hospital and basically saying, this is no worse than a bad season of the flu. And a lot of doctors have come out and said that. It's not nothing. It does exist. And yes, it is killing people, unfortunately. Yeah. But it's nothing like what they're saying. And even if you take the numbers and even if you actually swallow the pill of, okay, let's say that all of these people that they're telling us every day, the accumulative total, let's say they've all died because of COVID, as a percentage of the population, it's still microscopic,
Yeah.
The chances of falling into that category is so tiny anyway.
Yeah.
And yet we know a whole bunch of those numbers are not people that have died because of it. They just happen to have had it and died from someone else.
So what's behind this, Michael? I mean, it's easy to get conspiratorial, but I mean, I kind of tend to believe that maxim. I've never put down to conspiracy what you can equally put down to incompetence. Was it just sheer panic? Did Boris, just after this report came out, did he start thinking, oh God, I don't want to, did he do a Thatcher and just blink under pressure? Or is there something more behind this? Is it a massive experiment to see just how much we'll put up with, before we get sick of it?
I mean, we kind of obviously getting into by nature of the question, we're kind of getting into sort of the conspiracy type stuff, and I don't tend to do that, but I can certainly play the game. I mean, my belief on this is that if you see how other countries are reacting, there's not a lot of difference in terms of how governments are reacting to this. They're all over the top. I mean, I think pretty much Sweden is probably the only country that I've heard of in the world that's not going absolutely tyrannical on this, and locking down and, putting people out of business. And, you can certainly, there's a lot of dots that you could join. I mean, we could maybe talk about, the World Health Organization and the funding there. Yeah. Obviously, Big Pharma, Bill Gates. You've then got the move to censorship, surveillance that they're now rolling out. We've got these mobile phone apps now that they're getting you to install so that they can track all your movements, allegedly to trace this deadly virus. We've got the move towards a digital currency away from money. That even came out as part of the pandemic. Oh, don't use cash. You can't use cash anymore.
Yeah.
So getting us used to this idea that it'll be this social credit system where they'll be able to see wherever you go. You can't, you won't be able to just walk down to the shops and buy a loaf of bread with cash and be anonymous. Everything's going to be traced and tracked. So I think there's something bigger going on, that whether or not it's planned, I'm not quite sure, but I don't think the virus as such as planned, or the release of it, I don't believe was planned, but I think the measures that we're seeing definitely were planned. And there's definitely evidence as well that we can talk about if we've got time, that they knew this type of thing was coming, and that, they've spoken about lockdowns and quarantines for 20 years and, social distancing. These are not new things. These are going on in their sort of war games for like 20 years or so.
Yeah. Right.
So,
well, you wouldn't have to think that, say, 9/11 was an inside job to believe that the Project for a New American Century people, Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, all that, took advantage of 9/11 to further agendas that they'd already said they were in favor of already. Definitely when people are afraid, they acquiesce a lot of control to the authorities. And I'm always astonished how very lefty people, when I was growing up, the left used to see themselves as very anti-establishment. But I can't see, apart from complaining about the Tories every 5 minutes, they're not basically for the establishment. Whenever anything happens, all I see them is left-wing people defending the party line. On the other side of the coin to what you were saying about COVID deaths being exaggerated or figures being massaged, is you did a very informative podcast called "The Lockdown is Killing People," I think. Could you tell us a little bit about that, the other side of the coin? Because we're not getting a cost-benefit analysis here.
What is seen and what is unseen.
Yeah, exactly. We're always being presented, well, either tons of people will die, or we lock people down and people don't die. And that's not really the reality of the situation. The fact is, as you put it, the lockdown is killing people. Could you tell us a little bit about the main points of that?
Yeah, so they were. Yeah, it's became this whole mantra, didn't it? If it saves just one life, like like there's no repercussions of any of this, you know?
Yeah.
And that's really how it started out. Oh, if it saves one life, it's worth it. And you think, well, wait a second, what is all of this actually doing, you know? Because as soon as you know, it's the whole butterfly effect. You know, if you make a small change somewhere, it's going to affect some. This is like the biggest change the planet's ever seen. So the lockdown's only part of it. So yeah, I did, as you say, I did a full episode all about that. There's been lots of research done into things like domestic abuse. It seems to be on the increase. Suicides, obviously, depression, mental health. People that are dying because they're not going to hospital. So there was a study done in Austria, and they basically showed in this certain time frame that there were more deaths. I don't know what the time frame was, but I mean, it was a week or 2 weeks. But there were more deaths in that period from people with heart-related issues not going to hospital than there were from COVID-19 deaths that had actually created the fear and the sense of not wanting to go to hospital because they catch COVID anyway. So there's that going on. We're never going to know. That's part of the frustration about this. We're never going to know this stuff, you know. Yeah. How are we ever going to look back and say, oh yeah, you know, the suicides have gone up, or you know, this was the knock-on effect of the, you know, the economic downturn. I mean, one of the big things they are able to look at is the you know, the number of people that have died as a result of the last economic downturn. I mean, this is just from cancer deaths, which sounds kind of weird. Like, how could you link cancer deaths to an economic downturn? But there was a study done.
Stress, I guess.
Sorry, what's that?
Stress, I guess.
Well, yeah, stress directly, but there's also apparently a lack of access to medical care, particularly in the US, where obviously you've got to pay for it. But this study came up with this was an Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and basically suggested in the last economic crisis, there were 260,000 excess cancer deaths. So these were avoidable deaths from cancer, 260,000 during 2008 period. Now,
that's incredible.
If you've looked at the figures that were just released yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, that we're now in the worst recession, or will be in the worst recession since the 1700s.
Yeah.
And it showed you the little downturn. You had all the, you know, the little green bars where it was a good year, and then obviously red bars where it was a recession. You know, you had this tiny little blip for 2008, which resulted in 260,000 people dying avoidably from cancer. That now it was like, it was off the chart. I mean, you know, that downturn is just like a blip compared to what we're at now. And they basically equated this downturn, and every, you get the figure here, it was every 1% increase in unemployment is associated with 0.37 additional cancer deaths per 100,000 people. So if you equate this to the US, take the unemployment rate from October 2019, which was 3.6%, take it to where they think it could get, and it's not far off, which could get to 47 million in second quarter of this year. That would be 32%. So we take the difference of that'd be the increase, and then we use that figure of 0.37 for every 100,000 people for every 1%. That's going to create at least 33,000 cancer deaths in the US as a result of and that's just like one disease. Doesn't count stress, doesn't count suicides, domestic abuse, all the mental health issues that go with it, and everything else.
And we've not seen what the negative effects on people's lives is going to be after the lockdown's lifted and the chickens really come home to roost. It's interesting because the US Office of Management and Budget puts the value of a human life in the range of 7 million to 9 million. Nice to know you're worth so much, the government.
I've got to be at least worth twice that.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I think the charities, the effective altruism movement was saying that you could save a life in Africa for $3,600 donation. So a US person's life is worth.
Looks like Whitey's priced himself out the market again.
Right. But just before you go on, I just want to say, how do you put that's quite an arbitrary figure, but how do you put the value on being able to walk down to your local and have a coffee and work on your emails? How do you put a value on being able to go and visit your friends? How do you
Yeah.
put a value on going to the park and lying down without being moved on by the cops, right? It's very, very hard to evaluate the death by a million cuts that people are suffering due to these government impositions and comparing a cost-benefit analysis. You were saying, Tom?
Yeah, I was just going to, just briefly on the cancer thing again. To my knowledge, the UK as a whole is pretty poor at diagnosing, targeting, diagnosing and treating cancer anyway. I think with the lockdown period, with people not going to hospital, they're not going to catch those, they're pretty poor at doing it anyway, but they're not going to catch those early signals. So maybe people will be in advanced stages or relatively advanced stages by the time they recognize that they've got cancer. So it doesn't really surprise me that things like this could impact on cancer deaths. There's so much. I mean, even just not having human contact. I mean, some of us cope with it better than others, but there are some people who it's actually a physical need for them. They need human contact, and that in itself can be a stressful thing for them.
Well, that's it. I mean, particularly the elderly, they're trying to protect from all this. I mean, I've got a neighbor, she's in her 80s, she's on her own, her siblings have died, and we're trying to help out as all the neighbors are, but she can't get out. Obviously, she doesn't want to go out. She's terrified, so she can't get to a little Scrabble club and a book club, and she can't go out in a car. She normally takes a drive, and she can't do that. And you've got to think,
these are the last years of her life. These are the last years of her life.
Yeah.
I've seen a doctor speaking about it. There's a doctor over in Germany speaking about this and saying that it is going to, it's going to reduce the longevity of older people across the board, regardless of whether they get COVID or not.
That would seem to be, I don't need a medical degree to kind of see that. And it's noticeable also for about the last 5 years anyway. I mean, Antony, you'll know all about this. The government, newspapers, media have been telling us all about mental health, how important mental health is, and like you can't, are you taking care of your mental health? How about your neighbor? Check their mental health, and it's really important. Suddenly, mental health is completely out the window, with the lockdown, because I would think anybody who did have, depression or some sort of mental health issue like that before the lockdown, they're going to have increased paranoia. They're terrified of their own hands. Your own hands are out to get you. You've got to wash them every 30 seconds or you'll die. It's crazy. Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a tidal wave, I think, of people that have got exacerbated issues after this, and people that have got new mental health problems that they didn't have before, because it's not easy. I mean, we're kind of maybe used to doing it more, if we're working from home and, in the sort of the podcast mindset and, just locking ourselves away anyway. I mean, for me, day to day, it's not that different at the moment, other than the fact that the kids are always around and I can't go quite as far as I used to, as often as I used to. But yeah, there'll be some people that this is, they're going to have kind of trauma from this, it's going to be a period they'll look back on and like they won't be the same. It's not going to be a, even if everything was lifted today, people aren't suddenly going to go out. There'll be people that never recover from this and always kind of have that fear or that distrust of social environments or being close to people, whatever, and as you said, you can't gauge that, and nor can you put a price on, these little things you say, like going outside or taking a walk, going wherever you want, and not having to worry about looking over your shoulder in case somebody's snitching on you for going out twice a day or whatever. It's crazy.
And the fact that it's indefinite as well. It's not like we're going to lock you down for 6 weeks and that'll be the end of it. So everybody knows there's a definite moment where it's all going to come to an end, and that's okay. You can prepare for that. But when it's week in, week out, and you go, there doesn't seem to be any end of this. What does victory look like in this thing?
Well, that's it. I mean, they're constantly telling us. They've done that right from the beginning. It's always been, here's the latest measure. However, it could get worse than this. This is just what we're doing right now. If it gets worse, we might have to do X, Y. So it was always like, right. So you always had this like threat. It was, we'll ask you. First, we'll ask you to do something, then we'll tell you to do something, and then we'll force you to do something. And that's where we're at the moment. We're starting to see it shoots of kind of resistance, particularly in the US. I mean, you see more and more people protesting, people getting arrested. I mean, you know, a salon owner thrown in jail because she kept her business open. You know, armed militias going around trying to help people keep their businesses open. So it's entered now that phase of resistance. And obviously eventually it could come to conflict if it's not, you know, if it's not eased off.
Yeah.
But yeah, that unending sort of cycle to it, I think is, you know, it is draining. You know, it's psychologically draining and disorientating. It does feel almost like a, you know, like a Guantanamo Bay sort of, you know, it's like, we're not telling you when this is going to end. You know, it's an SAS kind of tactic 101, right? It's, you don't know how long this is going to go on for until the cricket keeper or whatever he's called, wicket keeper, turns up and says, "Oh, it's the end of the experiment." You know,
it's an episode in Black Mirror,
right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about some of the other funny businesses going on, because just recently YouTube announced, and maybe some other platforms, that they're going to basically take anything down that questions the World Health Organization's official line on coronavirus. Now, this is really super scary.
Of truth and accuracy.
Because you want to have only one line and no one's allowed to question it. Is the WHO infallible, Michael?
Infallible? No.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
They're not even very good. They're infallible.
Okay,
no,
so
I mean,
wait. Let me ask you another couple of questions. Is it impartial?
No.
Has it shown itself to be trustworthy?
No.
Does it have any sources of funding that might lead one to think that it might be making statements in the interests of something other than the public interest?
I think it's doing anything apart from the public interest. I mean, that's why it exists. I mean, I did some digging into this, and I was literally swearing out loud as I was doing it. I was like, it was like, I can't believe I'm finding this stuff. So basically, it's all publicly available stuff. Again, this is not theory that I'm making up. It's not a hunch. It's just fact. So I went into the last available report for the World Health Organization in terms of where its money comes from, because of course it's funded, gets its money from government, state governments around the world, and from individuals or corporations. It gets most of its money from individuals and corporations, surprisingly, and not from state governments. Right. But I had a look at the last report. For some reason, for the past 3 years, they've stopped releasing who's been giving money to them. Interesting. But the last available one was 2017. There's this guy, I don't know if you heard of this guy, Bill Gates. I don't know, I've never heard of this guy. But anyway, he gave the small sum of $324 million in a single year in 2017. So I just got this report from World Health Organization. I just drilled down. I looked at all the different amounts. Obviously, if you add it all up, it's several billion, 2-3 billion, I think. So I had a look at that, and I started looking at the different line items just to see the bigger amounts and see who were these people. So obviously that was, I think, the biggest one was Bill Gates. I then found one called the Gavi Alliance, which is the Vaccine Alliance, which gives money, 133 million they gave dollars to World Health Organization in that year. That's the Vaccine Alliance, obviously all about creating vaccines. Founder, Bill Gates. I then found the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. They gave $16 million to World Health Organization. Founder, Bill Gates.
Okay.
I then found National Philanthropic Trust, NPT. They gave $37 million. This is basically a company that lets rich people donate to funds as a tax saving device. So it's basically shove your money in here. Okay. The World Bank gave $145 million. Who's partnered with the World Bank on numerous initiatives? Bill Gates. The CDC Foundation, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control in the US. Okay. Yeah. They gave millions of dollars as well. Population Services International gave money. One of their key partners is Bill Gates. Rockefeller Foundation works closely with Bill Gates. Obviously, they've launched numerous initiatives in Africa. Rotary gave $62 million. Who partners with Rotary? Yes, Bill Gates.
So basically, all of the World Health Organization's major funders are basically Bill Gates under different names.
He could be the Antichrist.
It's like Bill Gates, William Gates, W. Gates. You know, it's like,
yeah, okay.
He's got all these
Mr.
different
Gates.
different monikers. Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay. So people can find more details of that on one of your podcasts, but they get the point. So the WHO is meant to be a third sector impartial body and what have you. Some of their money comes from governments and it is a bit of a tax suck, but fundamentally it dances to the fiddle of Bill Gates, right? So it's not impartial. It's not infallible. It's said things that were wrong before. And one of the most egregious things, I don't, I can't remember the details of that. I'd have to come back to you. I remember I once read a book that went through some of the ridiculous things that the WHO had done. So, but it's certainly not infallible. It's not. We know
well,
it's not impartial and it's not trustworthy. But it has actually contradicted itself. That's one of the things. You know, they said they've gone back on their own statements and said, "Oh
right.
no." So why are they allowed to be the only source of information? It's crazy that people would accept this.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the answers. Yeah. I'm just looking at what's happening. I say I'm putting the dots out there. I rarely kind of put my neck on the line to try and join them, but I mean, some of this seems fairly obvious. I mean, all of the companies, you know, as you would expect, they're all vaccine companies. You know, that's where the money is. That's what Bill Gates is in, and you know, the World Health Organization declares a pandemic. The vaccine companies develop a vaccine. Vaccine is mandatory to escape from lockdown. You know,
what's bound to happen is huge amounts of public funds are going to pay these companies for the vaccines. It's not going to be like you have to pay for your own one. The government's going to give massive handouts to these businesses.
Well, yeah, they are, but obviously it's, you know, that is all our money as well. I mean,
exactly.
They tried to take an organization tried to take the World Health Organization to task in the H1N1 pandemic for this exact reason. It said, look, you've blown this out of all proportion. It's not a pandemic. You've done this. These companies made billions of dollars from the vaccinations. Not that many people actually died as a result of it. It's just it's a complete scam. And obviously it got squashed because, you know, the people that were speaking out about it were tiny little people, and the World Health Organization is backed by billionaires and governments.
Yeah. Well, for me, it spoke volumes just when I saw that chap on I don't know what news channel it was, but he was from the World Health Organization, and they tried to ask him about the situation in Taiwan, and he just blanked the question twice, pretended he didn't hear it, and then eventually just pulled the plug in the interview because they just wouldn't recognize that Taiwan even existed. And that, you know, so you see who's pulling the strings there. You know, even if the Chinese are not pulling the strings, it just shows that the World Health Organization is loath to upset the Chinese, and that in itself means it's not impartial. It's not impartial.
Yeah, no, I saw exactly the same clip as well. Yeah, it's just, it's crazy. It should open people's eyes, you know, to what could be going on. You know, we're not saying that this is definitely going on, but it's not. Something's not right.
Something's
you know, we've got to.
Something stinks in Sweden. Well, actually, Sweden's the exception.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about Sweden were when a lot of the deaths that are being reported in Sweden are all in old folks' homes where there's been breakouts where people all basically died in the same premises in close quarters. And if you excluded those from the figures, their death count was way, way, way lower. So that's just some more of the funny business that's going on, apart from the different ways that countries are counting the deaths. Just to touch briefly on this Neil Ferguson fellow, he is not to be confused with the excellent classic liberal thinker of our times, Neil Ferguson, who's married to Ayan Ali, let's call her. I can't
Ayan Hirsi Ali.
Yeah, there you go. You
But,
can
yeah,
pronounce
okay.
her middle name. Easy for you to say, my friend. You know, the guy was telling us what to do and put out a really stupid guideline which wouldn't allow you to drive from one home to another home. I mean, there's some guidelines you could say are fairly sensible. Maybe it wasn't a guideline, maybe it was a statement of the law. He got sacked from violating his own guideline, or he was forced to resign, just as Catherine Calderwood, the chief medical officer, was resigned here in the UK because she told people not to drive to their other home and then drove to her other home. It's like, see, if you just don't tell people to do stupid stuff that isn't going to increase anyone's risk of contracting the virus, then maybe you will not be struck by your own sword. But he who
But I think,
lives by the
yeah,
sword dies by the sword.
but I
And
think it just underlines what we suspect is the attitude of managerial elites, which is the rules are there only for the little people. Rules are not for the managerial elites themselves. Of course, they're allowed to go to their second home. You know, Boris
yeah,
Johnson went to Chequers to convalesce. That's not exactly around the corner from 10 Downing Street. You know, the rules don't apply to them. It's only, you know, the commissars don't have to obey by the rules. Only the proletariat. And
that's it.
that,
And
yeah,
Marx was scared of the class difference between capitalists and workers, but this is just the real fear was the feudalism that we basically have. It's just elected feudalism where our overlords are allowed special exceptions
yeah.
and to their own rules.
Well, he was
Yeah.
certainly taking prima nocta, I think, was old Professor Ferguson. He was cutting
Well,
somebody else's grass.
I did an episode just today, actually, just before we jumped on this call. I cannot stop finding politicians that are breaking their own lockdown
Right.
laws. Like
Yeah.
I found 3 mayors today. There was a mayor in the US that closed nail salons, said stay at home. She was pictured in a nail salon getting her nails done.
Oh
There was
my
another
God.
mayor that issued a lockdown law saying stay at home. If you do go out, don't socialize. You know, make sure you're social distancing. He was photographed at a restaurant with friends and family with no masks on, all sitting around just like it's a happy Sunday. You know, there's a guy in Spain who was sacked, a mayor in Catalonia region. He was sacked because he was out driving his car, just doing whatever he wanted, going out for a drink. I mean, all of these guys, you know, there's unending number of these people. And as you say, for me, it's a twofold problem. It's as you say, it's that first thing of do as we say, not as we do, which is bad enough. But the second thing is, why are they not bothered? You know, I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
bothered. I've done all the research. I could care less.
Right.
I know there's very minimal risk of me going around. I mean,
Right.
look at it this way. A professor in Germany, Professor Streeck, he went over to a town in Germany that had really high incidence of COVID-19. He went around with his team, taking swabs off toilets, toilet seats, handles, door handles, everywhere that you could imagine. He could not grow the virus anyway. So the only way you're going to get it in public is if somebody coughs or sneezes onto something that then goes in your mouth, or if they cough or sneeze directly in your mouth. So if they cough or
Right.
sneeze on a piece of fruit, you literally eat that
Okay.
right then, you might get it. But yeah, it's, you know, what do they know? They're not bothered. They're not fearful.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? They're putting out all this message, and yet they're just going about their daily business. So that again is the second sort of point to this. That again, it just makes you wonder what's actually going on.
Yeah. A bit like Bill Gates, to mention him again, building seafront property, well, not building it, buying property in Florida on the beach. He's telling everybody else that we're going to get engulfed in 9-foot waves in a few years' time.
Right.
He's obviously not worried about it himself. He's invested that money in it. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, what kind of annoys me is whatever the results of this are going to be, people will just come out and say that it was the lockdown that stopped it from being a disaster. When the figures come in, because I've heard people who are supposedly intelligent, like Sam Harris, say things like, oh, you know, the thing is with these coronavirus people who are skeptical about it, there seems to be no reason and evidence that convince them that blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, it was basically the complete opposite of what he was saying, which is there was no evidence that could be presented to Sam Harris, which would make
certainly
him,
no empirical evidence.
yeah, which would make him think that the lockdown measures were overzealous. It's like, well, you know, what would we actually have to say to you to get you to check your opinion? Because the irony completely escaped him, and he didn't even make an attempt to point out the fact that it was the most flagrant thing. I thought, listening to his position was the kind of reversal of reality. Now, one of the, and I hear him do that quite a lot. It does annoy me, because see if someone's just an idiot, you just accept that they're just an idiot. But when someone's like quite sharp and intelligent and has good points on issues, when they get things woefully wrong, you just want to face palm. Well, one of the more bizarre stories was the president of Tanzania, John Magufuli, however you pronounce that. Easy for me to say. Tanzania, there you go.
That's not a bronzing salon, by the way.
He allowed these coronavirus testing kits to be imported into his countries. I don't know which ones. And they tested non-human samples, including a goat and a pawpaw fruit, whatever the hell that is. And the fruit and the goat tested positive for coronavirus, which casts a massive doubt on whether these tests are in any way reliable.
Well, I think the whole fruit world would be worried now. It's probably we've got apples and strawberries are probably on lockdown. But yeah, I think he gave them human names, didn't he? He returned the results to the lab and gave them human-sounding names, and then he came back and said, "Oh yeah, these have definitely all got COVID-19." So, but yeah, in terms of the lockdown, I mean, there's a very sort of vocal and quite kind of prominent guy that's been stepping forward and speaking out about the so-called pandemic, this Professor Witkowski. So this guy's been working for 30 plus years as an epidemiologist. He's not paid by the government. And he was basically saying, well, look, if you look at there was a presidential briefing in the US on the 17th of April, and they showed this graph, and it had 3 peaks on it of hospital admissions this year. There was one in January, there's one in February, and there was one in March the 18th. The 2 in January, February, I think, were flu-related. And incidentally happened to actually, one of them was a little bit larger than the one in March. The one in March was COVID-19. And that was the highest the hospital admissions ever got in the US, was March the 18th. So he basically said that was the peak of that was the peak right there. You know, that's the peak of the virus. It's gone down since then. There's been fewer hospital admissions since then. This was their own data, again, CDC data. They didn't lock down till like a week after. So he's like, it was completely pointless. The herd immunity was already been built up.
Yeah.
And they put us into lockdown, and we can't get herd immunity if we're all stuck at home and not seeing each other. So
they're literally locking the door after the horse is bolted. Locking the stable door.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that people who are at home are still getting some exercise, and if to keep their mental health in order, and if you are scared of the coronavirus spread, there is one sport that I particularly recommend during coronavirus, and that's fencing. I mean, you wear a mask, you wear gloves, and if anyone gets near you, you just stab the fucker, right? Perfect for corona.
Okay. Yeah.
So take up fencing.
Could I just say that on concerning stats, if you and how it's going to be after the lockdown, how they're going to make it sound like the lockdown was this panacea. It was fantastic. If the manipulating of figures that we know they're doing at the moment, how much better are they going to be able to do that when they've got more time and at their leisure to just sit down and manipulate all the figures and pick and choose and cherry pick what figures they're going to present very professionally to the public? It's going to be even worse after. So you can't really. It's unfortunate. You're forced to try and you're forced to do your own homework and try and come up with some conclusion as to what's really going on.
Yeah, you have
cannot
to
trust.
you've got to look beyond the headlines. I mean, that's basically what I started doing. I was like, there's something else going on here. I've got to dig a bit deeper. And people have been saying, if you look back to things like the AIDS outbreak and all that, the reporting was like 1,000 times better back then. You know, they were reporting when that person contracted the illness and when they died. We're not getting that now. We're just getting every day. We're getting, oh, there's 500 deaths today. From when? Well, we don't know. Maybe past few weeks. You know, and then oh, there's a backlog. You know, there's one period in April, a day in April, where they registered like 700 deaths, and they come from the previous 4 weeks. Yeah, and they just bumped them in. There's no accountability or transparency at all.
Do they even know who patient 0 was yet? You know, do they even? Even you know, that's probably you, Antony.
Probably. I'm responsible for most things that go wrong. I have to say, I'm not as worried about COVID-19 or even the lockdown as I am in people's gullibility, right? If you didn't have to live in a society and we could all just do our own thing, then you wouldn't have to worry about it. But as Aristotle pointed out, the unfortunate consequence of not being interested in politics is being ruled by your inferiors. And since we're all subject to the whims of our neighbor, their gullibility is a deep concern to us. Whereas, you know, it would be nice if we just went, well, you know, you think what you think, and that's okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, they get this thing called a vote.
Yeah, I know. Pretty shocking.
Which allows them.
Whose idea was that? Whose idea was that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Mike, is there anything either of you two want to cover?
I think. Oh, there was one kind of section that I didn't get a chance to go over just real quickly, and that is just this preparedness. You know, they kept. This is another one of their sort of party line. Oh, this caught us totally off guard. Like we just never ever saw this coming, which is complete BS. Like even Fauci himself a few years ago is widely quoted now. He's given a speech and said, you know, it's very, very likely that we will see, you know, a surprise pandemic in the next few years. You know, they've been planning for this for a long time. They've had a number of these war games. There's one in, obviously, the event 201 that everybody knows about. But there's another one in 2001 called Dark Winter, where they were preparing for an outbreak. In this case, it was actually a bio attack. Yeah. But the responses, some of the stuff that they were saying was, you know, there is exactly the same, talking about penalties for propagating dangerous information, restriction on travel, cancel public gatherings, non-essential meetings of people more than 50. And I was reading this from like however many, 19 years ago. I'm thinking, this is the language that they're using now. This is not. Yeah. They're not thinking on the feet with this. This is something that they've had time to prepare for. So this whole idea that, oh yeah, we just didn't see this coming and it's unprecedented and it's they've had plenty of time and they know what they're doing. And I think that's where I'm at on this, is that this virus has happened. It's not as bad as they're making out. As the doctors seem to be saying, it's a bad season of flu, maybe a little bit worse. But I think the tyrannical governments around the world have just rubbed their hands with glee at this and just thought, this is it, guys. This is the one we've been waiting for. Let's roll it out. Let's roll out the privacy. Let's roll out the surveillance. Let's roll out, digital currency and all these things. And
go on.
What was of interest to me was, the reaction of a lot of environmentalists who have, obviously, because human beings are the real virus, right? They have decided that this has all been very good for the planet. Mother Earth has benefited greatly from this. So although this lockdown has been unprecedented, it has set a precedent. And now at any time in the future, should the government decide we all have to be locked up again for our own good, or what could be more beneficial than locking us up for the good of the planet, let's stop killing Mother Earth. So stay in your houses until further notice. That's a big concern, I think, for the future. And that's not just, you could say, well, that's okay, that's just the greenos. They probably won't get into power. But no, there's environmentalists of all political hues. They're in the Conservative Party. David Cameron was famously, very pro-green and pro-greenwash. And I think that this this could be rolled out again at the drop of a hat, not just for the coronavirus. You know, that seems reasonable that could happen, but for any given thing that they deem to be a threat to the public or to national security.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that they're going to use it, as you say, for the coronavirus multiple times. I mean, Edward Snowden, he was interviewed on Vice, and he was saying, you know, what's going to happen? When are you going to stand up? Is it going to be, you know, lockdown 5, lockdown 55? You know, he said his quote was, "They are building the architecture of oppression." You know, that's what they're doing right now. They've had all this stuff lined up, and they've now got the perfect excuse. The right amount of fear, the right amount of media exposure around the world, and they're just thinking this is the perfect time to roll this out. Obviously, when
perfect hobgoblin.
When they get the resistance, you know, obviously they're facing resistance now in the US, and you know, I won't say it's kicking off, but there's certainly, you know, people are starting to fight back a little bit. Then maybe they will ease it off until you know, winter, and hey ho, guess what? Another, you know, a second wave comes along or whatever. Which, again, going back to that Professor Witkowski, would not have happened with lockdown. You know, if we'd just left us to isolate the vulnerable, the immunocompromised and the elderly, everyone else go about their business, there wouldn't be a second wave. But now, because of the lockdown, there will be a second wave.
Absolutely.
So, if you didn't want to like shut everything down and make everyone poor, I don't think we really know the extent that this is going to impoverish people yet. It's going to take months to see what the domino effects are. If you were to argue for the government to do something, it would be like, make sure those vulnerable people who choose to stay at home get food delivered to their house, or get someone to come out to help them with any of their needs. You know, that would be the, you know, compassionate statist position. Now,
and don't stand in the way of private companies who are willing to produce testing kits and, you know, PPE at a fraction of the cost. But no, you can't really start doing that. You have to go through all the
red
all the
tape
channels. To take you 2 years before you can even produce a kit.
And some of those like gullible lefties that I was talking about before, who I've seen on Facebook drone on aimlessly at how evil the Conservative Party are coming out to say, well, you know, we should just institute a UBI to stop this kind of thing happening again, universal basic income. And what I wonder at is, it's how bribable people are. I don't really wonder at it, but it's one, how gullible people are, two, how bribable people are. Because as far as I'm concerned, now more than ever, right, the UBI is part of this architecture of oppression. Everyone thinks it's going to liberate them. But you just wait till the government says, well, you know, you're posting subversive stuff on Facebook, so we're going to take away your UBI. We're going to, if you don't sort out your recycling, you'll take out your UBI. And it'll start with things like people flicking their cigarette butts or littering, or they get, instead of getting a fine, they just get their UBI docked. And people goes, yeah, and a good thing too. I mean, society's furnishing you with a UBI, and you go and throw your cigarette butt on the street. But that's just the door. And one of the reasons why I revised my book, Universal Basic Income For and Against, in 2020 was to add an extra essay on that idea of how the UBI is not a utopia. It's the basis of a science fiction novel, of an episode of Black Mirror, where the government uses it to bribe and blackmail and influence people into doing what the elite decides. And now, after seeing it being advocated under the pretense of this, I'm more convinced than ever that point about the tyranny of the UBI is
it's not science fiction,
it.
because it's already a reality in China. You know, the social credit system is a reality.
Yeah,
it's just more. Takes the will.
Yeah, it's just more dependent. It's more dependence on government. I mean, that's one of the things you have to think that that's part of what they're doing here. You know, everybody's kind of bowing down to government. We're doing what you're saying. We're following your actions, and we're kind of, you know, they've got us in the palm of their hand now. I mean, obviously not present company excluded, but, you know, most people are like, yeah, we've got to do what they say, and I can only get out. I can only work when they tell me. It's sinister, you know. It's that move towards more tyranny, basically more control and more tyranny, as people hand over willingly their liberty and their freedom and their their decisions to a higher power, to government. So
I think I can handle the more tyranny and the more oppression. I don't think I could handle any more dancing nurses on TikTok.
The TikTok nurses. Yeah.
Right. Well, it would be fun.
On that subversive note.
Yeah, I would be fine to let the society take the course that it's going if there was an alternative planet B that we could all just escape to and live the way that we want. Sadly, that's not the case. Michael Cheney, thank you so much for joining us on the Scottish Liberty Podcast. Tell people where they can find you.
They're best to go over to plandemic.tv. Plandemic.tv. I've got all the videos, all my episodes on there, and videos that get banned from YouTube. I also grab them and put them on there, all to do obviously with the coronavirus.
And you also started a website called Corona Truth.
Yeah, I started a Corona Truth website. That was the first iteration of it. So I wrote a report, and what I was finding is it was so hard to keep updating it every day with all the new stuff that was coming out. So I just switched over to video format. So that's where I got the plandemic.tv. So I'm just doing videos now, taking all the content and put it into videos instead.
And finally, they can, of course, find the Michael Cheney Show on iTunes or whatever their usual podcasting app is. Thanks very much, guys. Until next week.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Thanks, Michael.